Warbonds and Helldivers 2 are the beating heart of a free and fair democracy. Each one of these comes with a lot of patriotic goodies, such as guns, throwables, armor sets, and customizable items. And while the free Helldivers Mobilized Warbond is amazing for providing you with a good base arsenal, the Premium Warbonds contain some of the most interesting, unique, and powerful items that are sure to enhance your efforts in spreading liberty across the galaxy. These Warbonds, of course, actually cost you super credits though, and that can make it even tougher to decide between these, and it begs the question, which Premium Warbond is the best and which is the worst? Dr. Pooplove here, and that's what I hope to find out. In this video, I will be discussing each of the Premium Warbonds and ranking them on a tier list, based on how they impact gameplay specifically, with S being the best and Poop Hater being the worst. Starting with the absolute worst Warbond that we have so far, which, by the way, just because this is considered the worst in my opinion doesn't mean it's not a good Warbond. It's just that when you stack this up against the other Premium Warbonds, the offering in this one is the weakest, and this would be the last Warbond I would try to secure if given the option. And that is the Chemical Agents Warbond. And most of the reasons for this is that this Warbond kind of stinks. Literally. I mean, the theme is around gas. And look, my name is Dr. Pooplove, so I love gas. But gas in Helldivers 2 is a bit of a niche use case. Gas clouds can cause enemies to be confused, they can take corrosive damage, and they can even end up attacking each other instead of you. And this makes for an interesting and unique effect, but one that is a little bit niche, and so its overall value and impact on the battlefield will be a little bit less than some other things. Now, I'm solely judging the ranking here based on the aspects that actually affect gameplay, like the guns, throwables, and perks, but the theme aesthetic of mustard yellow wouldn't help the case if I were. But let's get to the gameplay stuff. This contains the Sterilizer, which is a stratagem very much like the flamethrower, only releasing gas. And this can be nice, mostly on the bug front, for getting the horde off your back, but it won't be the main killer of the horde. If you do want to get them off your back permanently, you will need something a bit stronger. This Warbond also contains the Guard Dog Breath stratagem, which is a backpack that has a little gas gun following you around, gassing up the enemies. And this can be good too versus the bugs. It does kind of a little bit step on the toes of the Sterilizer a bit in that, well, I kind of would rather have this backpack helping me keep enemies off while I can actually focus on killing, but either way, it's still a pretty cool addition. You also have the Gas Grenade here, which is an alternative way to release your gas, and honestly maybe is the best of these just because it releases a pretty big gas cloud affecting everything in that area for a good while. But the problem here is this does have to compete with some of the other throwables that I will be mentioning, and this just kind of emphasizes that this is really a niche specialized use case that likely won't be that appealing to the majority of Helldivers. Now, rounding off the gassiness of this Warbond is the Advanced Filtration armor passive contained on the armor sets here, and this does help protect you from gas damage and will make a pretty big difference in your ability to survive while inside the gas. But I honestly don't think you will need to be surrounding yourself in gas too often, so it doesn't come that much in handy, and it's hard to think that you might select this over some of the other armors that are out there. But perhaps something cool that you could do is gas strike over an objective and have this armor on, which allows you to roam around a little more freely completing the objective. Still though, this is just pretty niche, and ironically the best part of this Warbond is actually the non-gassy aspect of this, and that is the stim pistol, which is a really good sidearm that doesn't damage the enemies, but instead what this does is you can use this to fire a stim at your teammates when they are weak or they need some stamina, helping to replenish those stats for them. And it's pretty amazing for team play and a really unique offering for the game. It's really strong, and it really makes me want to see perhaps a totally medic focused Warbond sometime soon. All in all, the Chemical Agents Warbond has some good stuff here, but it is pretty niche and it's not the most impactful or necessary stuff. Plus, there's no primaries here, which, I love my primaries. So as the worst, the Chemical Agents Warbond gets the honor of sitting in the poop hater category. And now before we get to the next Warbond here, just a quick disclaimer. These rankings are just my opinion on these and is more so a fun way to talk about these Warbonds. It's not meant to be taken super seriously, and also the developers are constantly updating this game, so perhaps by the time you see this, things may have gotten rebalanced and somehow some of these may have moved around. So just do your own research and take with a grain of salt any advice from a guy named Dr. Pooplove. But next, let's get to the next worst Warbond, and that is the Viper Commandos. Now, again, I'm not judging this based on style, but I will still talk about it a little bit. The style on this one definitely kicks ass, making you feel like Arnold, get to the Pelican, do it now. Okay, so when it does come to gameplay, this is a bit lackluster. The primary weapon, which is the Liberator Carbine, does happen to be a weapon that I like versus the bugs. It can be pretty strong, but it is just a variant of the base Liberator with a faster fire rate and more recoil. So it's kind of a pretty boring choice, and this is the only primary that actually comes with this Warbond. Now, the Bushwhacker shotgun sidearm is pretty cool, providing you with a pocket shotgun that packs a lot of stagger and has the ability to mod it so you can release all 3 bullets at once or 1 at a time. But this gun doesn't really blow your socks off, and it's mostly just something to kind of help you out when you get into a jam. It's not that amazing or that necessary for you to have. The throwable here is the throwing knives, which does get some cool style points, and it can be somewhat of a good stealth weapon, allowing for some silent takedowns. Although, is it just me or is the crosshair pretty misaligned on this? Because I'm missing a lot of these. But other than that, the knives just honestly aren't really that useful on the battlefield. They're still kind of a bit weak, and while this did receive a nice increase in capacity, it's far from my first choice. It would have been cooler, honestly, if they kind of went the other way with this thing, giving you 1 to 2 super powerful knives that could do comically large amounts of damage to enemies, but do so in a stealth way and also allow you to pick up that knife off those fallen enemies. I would have loved it if it worked like that, but here we have something that's just kind of for style and maybe a bit memey. Like, you might want to use this if you're trying to challenge yourself with the Constitution. Okay, but although the guns and the throwables might be lacking a bit here, the perks that do come with this Warbond are pretty nice. The Experimental Infusion Booster is pretty great, boosting the impact of stims, making them increase your movement speed and damage reduction as well. And honestly, in terms of boosters, this is one of the top ones, but a Warbond isn't really going to win that many extra points for having a strong booster, as other teammates can also bring boosters, so you don't really even need to own this Warbond to benefit from this booster, as long as you have a teammate who does. And while this is a great booster, for me it isn't one of the top 3 boosters. It is still one of the top boosters out of these Premium Warbonds, at least in my opinion, so that's good. There's also the Peak Physique perk that comes with the armor, and this is also pretty amazing, providing extra melee damage, which can even help boost the Constitution's bayonet. But let's be real, melee isn't really being used that much on the battlefield. But the Peak Physique also has another perk, which is this greatly improved weapon handling. Ironically enough, though, the improved weapon handling is most useful for some of the weighty guns that you will be unlocking in other Warbonds. So I definitely would only try to get this Warbond after getting some of those first. All in all, again, this does have some stuff going for it, but none of it is really going to blow your mind. And certainly, style aside, it's towards the bottom in terms of Warbonds that I would prioritize. So this will get a C for me. But let's move on to the next Warbond on the list, which is where I might start to ruffle some feathers, because a lot of these upcoming Warbonds are actually pretty strong, and I would even say some of them are pretty close in rating to each other. So it's been a little bit hard to place these above and below each other, but the next Warbond I have to say is the Freedom's Flame Warbond. Now, this Warbond is interesting because it brings with it a lot of flame stuff. You have the Torture Primary, which is a primary version of the Flamethrower, and this is actually pretty nice with dealing with most of the bugs. And this can actually kill a charger from the front, which makes it the only primary that's able to do so. You also have the Crisper Sidearm, which is amazing and just one of the best secondary weapons that this game has to offer versus the bugs. And you have the Cookout Shotgun, which deals all this this fire damage and stagger to enemies, and happens to be a very high S tier weapon versus the bugs. You also have the fire resistant armor, which was one of the most requested passives that finally got introduced, and this is quite nice, especially when wielding flamethrower type guns, as being a pyromaniac can be a dangerous business. But all of this is part of the reason why this warbond won't rank too highly, and that is because what it's offering is a lot of things that are specifically very good versus the bugs, but are actually kind of bad for the bots. And another detractor here is the kind of horrible booster, which is the firebomb booster, which in a lot of respects, when you have this booster on, it actually may make things worse for you on the battlefront. Basically, this booster allows any Hellpod to bring with it a fiery explosive blast wherever it lands. And while I think this was meant to be a pretty cool way to weaponize your Hellpods, what often happens is you end up creating a lot of chaos around you, where your teammates end up accidentally killing themselves or needing to dodge fire all the time. A lot of these Hellpods specifically are things that you need to pick up, so in some ways you do want to be close to them. Overall though, with the Warbond itself, it's still pretty good overall, and it has a lot of strong things for the bugs, but the main reason that this won't rank really much higher is because it is only really useful for one faction. So I will give it a B. But now let's get to the next Warbond, which was still pretty close in my eyes, and that is the Truth Enforcer's Warbond. Okay, so for this one, if I were counting style points, this would end up being a top S tier because the hell drip you get with this is amazing. But we aren't factoring that in. I will also say though, from this point onwards, these Warbonds are getting harder and harder to rank because in terms of gameplay, there is a lot of good stuff here that should not be ignored. The Halt shotgun is perhaps the biggest standout in this Warbond in that it offers an extremely unique gun that serves dual functions. It can stun and freeze light armored enemies in its stun mode, which feels very nice and freezes enemies for quite some time. And one thing I actually didn't know at first is that you can stun a charger from the front with this, which definitely gives this some extra points. But this shotgun also allows you to switch modes and blast enemies with its medium flechette rounds. And this leads to an interesting interplay as you can stun enemies with the stun and then switch to your flechette rounds for a good deal of damage. Or use the stun rounds and switch to a sidearm, or combine with something like a guard dog backpack. Either way, this is extremely unique and should be celebrated for bringing some interesting strategy and versatility to the battlefield. Another standout here with this Warbond is the Loyalist sidearm, which provides you with a pocket plasma charge-up weapon, essentially a mini purifier with all the benefits that plasma weapons have, and these are great, especially versus the bots and also versus the charger butts. This secondary weapon is amazing, but it is limited in ammo, and so it won't provide as much impact to the battlefield as a plasma primary might, but it's still pretty solid. You also have the Reprimand here, which is good, but is not actually much of an SMG in that it is two-handed. This gun also shares a lot of similar traits to another gun from another Warbond, which we will talk about, so I don't think getting this is such an urgent pickup. The perks with this Warbond are pretty cool too. The Dead Sprint allows you to trade health for more stamina, which I like, but it actually seems a little bit like a double-edged sword type booster that may detract from gameplay as well. It might annoy your teammates as you basically automatically drain your health when you run out of stamina, and it forces the players therefore to watch their stamina bar much more closely than they maybe otherwise were. I do wish there was some sort of a toggle or something to apply this effect if you want to or not. Either way, I do think this is a welcome booster with some good positive potential. You also have the unflinching perk here, which is useful in reducing the pain wobble when you get shot at, and this is going to be more beneficial to you on the bot front, as the flinch from incoming fire can be very annoying to deal with. One issue I have noticed though is because you aren't flinching when taking fire, you might be a little bit slower to realize you are actually getting hurt, because the flinch was a good indicator of that, so it's just something that you need to pay attention to. It also doesn't really help you much from the rockets. And as a perk, it doesn't seem to impress as much as I initially was hyped for. In summary though, this Warbond has a lot of uniqueness and some pretty amazing standouts, but I will say even the standouts aren't really earth-shattering in my opinion. It also has some things that are about average or maybe even get a bit of a mixed score, so for that reason I will give this a B as a Warbond. But this brings me to the next Warbond, which I think overall does include a lot more standout strong things in it, and that is the Polar Patriots Warbond. Now, I will be honest, it's really getting very hard at this point to rank at least the next 3 Warbonds, as at any given moment I end up changing my mind in the order, but at least at the time of writing this, the Polar Patriots Warbond sits as perhaps the last among really what are amazing Warbonds. And this has a lot to offer, and what is funny here is this was perhaps the most hated Warbond and actually kind of marks the lowest point in this game's history when it initially came out. And perhaps one thing that makes it a little bit unfair is that this probably would have ranked at the bottom of the list had I been judging this based on what it was like when it actually came out. But regardless, the gameplay aspects in this Warbond have received a good number of mostly buffs, and as such, where it was before is kind of irrelevant. Now, starting off with some of the less interesting parts of this Warbond, we have the armor sets, which do not offer anything unique to this Warbond that you can't actually get elsewhere. But each of the 3 armor sets do offer something different, as one is the Scout, one is the Fortified, and one is the Servo Assisted. So there's at least some variety. The booster here, Motivational Shocks, isn't too amazing. It's meant to lower the recovery time it takes when the slow effect is applied to you from an enemy, and well, that can help mostly versus the bugs, but not so much from the bots. Basically, it's kind of an okay perk. It helps you recover from the slowdown a little bit quicker, but it doesn't give you a ton of benefits, and you don't really see it being used too much out on the battlefield. But let's get to the guns, where this Warbond starts to really shine. We have the Tenderizer, which is one of the best assault rifles, offering a lot of damage per bullet and a very low recoil. It's very amazing versus the bugs, and it's even pretty decent versus the bots, although it does struggle a little bit in that it's only light armor penetrating. We also have the Pummeler in this, which funnily enough was actually one of the strongest parts of this Warbond when it first came out, but now it's actually probably one of the weakest aspects. Regardless, this SMG is still pretty good. It's a bit of a defender variant where the bullets dish out some stun on the enemies, and that can be especially good for halting things like stalkers and berserkers, and it also pairs pretty well with the ballistic shield. You also have the Verdict sidearm here, which cannot be forgotten. This is a solid medium armor penetrating secondary, which is quite good, being able to even one-shot Devastator heads and allowing for more viability in you carrying light armor weapons, knowing that you at least have something to deal with the medium armor. This also includes the Impact Incendiary Throwable, which is very good, especially versus the bug hordes, creating a fiery explosion upon impact. Perhaps though the greatest standout that uplifts this Warbond the most is the Purifier Plasma Energy Weapon, which is amazing and versatile. It's this plasma gun which allows you to shoot out either charged up larger blasts or fire very fast plasma shots with less damage. And this thing can melt enemies. Notably, it kills chargers very fast with its fast fire rate on the bug front, and it can basically wipe the floor with everything on the bot front, killing them fast, doing a lot of splash damage in charged up mode. It's just amazing. Now, you could argue this is one of the best guns in the game right now, and perhaps because of that, this Warbond should be higher, but my main justification for keeping it a little bit lower is I think that the Scorcher sits just a little bit below this and is still a very strong weapon that can be grinded for free, so you may not want to prioritize getting another plasma weapon if you have already grinded for the Scorcher. At least I don't think it'll be as urgent. Regardless, this was a really tough call to make, and it can be hard to pass up going for this Warbond first just because of this one gun alone. I mean, I wouldn't blame you. Ultimately though, this Warbond is amazing, and in particular with the guns in here, I think this is going to get an A from me. But let's see what ends up winning out over this, and that is the Cutting Edge Warbond. Now, what I like about this is this Warbond offers a lot of nice variety and interesting energy weapons. You have the Sickle, which is a very unique assault rifle that, in my opinion, is not the best for the bugs, but many people do love this and will disagree with me on that front. And I will say I do like this quite a bit for the bots. This weapon does benefit as well from having infinite ammo and next to no recoil. It's pretty fun to use and offers some variety. I think even if it may not be the strongest in my opinion, having variety is something that makes the game a little bit more fun. Next, you have the Plasma Punisher, which is basically this plasma grenade launcher that won't close bug holes but will stagger and wreck clumps of enemies. This is really solid and actually one of my favorite weapons, and plasma in general is very strong in this game. Now, you also have the Arc Blitzer, which again is another very unique weapon with infinite ammo, and this releases these electric bolts to enemies that performs a lot of stagger and can do good work in in holding especially the bug horde back. Many people will tell you that this is an S tier versus the bugs. Honestly, it's very good on both fronts. This warbond also contains the Las Dagger, and that's a decent sidearm, almost like a scythe sidearm with infinite ammo, and that can be a great backup for you, especially if you want to manage your ammo supplies. Now, what's also great in this warbond is the stun grenade, which is one of the strongest grenades in the game, which freezes enemies in place so you can have your way with them. And this is especially great for the Hulks and arguably maybe a must-have on the bot front. So the weapon variety is one of the biggest standouts of this warbond, but you also have a unique armor passive here, which might not be the strongest, but it's unique. It provides resistance to arc damage, and this can be kind of weird here because most of the times when you are at threat of being killed by arc damage, it's because you have another player on your team with something like the blitzer or the arc thrower. And that can be weird because it basically makes you have to choose your armor passive largely based on the fact that your teammate might be careless and kill you, because you're not really at risk of hurting yourself from your own arc weapons. To be fair though, this can be good if you do plan to have Tesla towers on you, and at the very least it is a unique armor passive. It's decent to have this option, but this definitely doesn't give it a whole lot of extra points for this warbond. The localization confuser booster is also an interesting one and is perhaps one of the more useful boosters in that it can give you a little bit of breathing room in between bug breaches, bot drops, and patrols. I don't think this is going to make a huge difference though, and again I don't see this actually being used that often, but it's still maybe on the upper end of some of these boosters. Overall though, this warbond is great in that I think it really can add a lot of variety and interesting things that are also fun to use to your arsenal. And so it has a lot to offer, and most of the things on here are actually decently strong. So for that, I will give this an A. But let's get to the next warbond on this list, which is the Steeled Veterans Warbond. And now this one might actually be a little bit controversial for some because there is some poop in here, especially the booster, which lowers your reinforcement cooldown. And that's only really going to provide value to you if you plan on dying and expending all of your reinforcements down to 0. You really should be planning to maintain your reinforcements and dying as little as possible, and other boosters can maybe help you a little bit more with that. So this is definitely not one that I think anyone should really take out on the battlefield. The armor set here is the servo assisted, and this is also not the strongest in my opinion, but it offers longer throws of stratagems and throwables, and that could be good for reaching targets that are farther away, or even for stealthy approaches, being able to throw something from an undetectable distance. And the increased limb health here shouldn't be forgotten, as that can be helpful as well. Another thing here that might not give this a ton of points is the incendiary grenade, which is good, but it explodes at a bit of a delay, and this has almost been made irrelevant by the fact that you have the impact incendiary from the Polar Patriots warbond. But things are starting to get a little bit better with this. You do have the Liberator concussive in here, which isn't the best, but at least offers a very unique staggering function, which can be especially useful on the bug side and can actually pair pretty well with the incendiary grenades as you corral enemies into a fiery explosion. And so far, not really enough to justify this high of a ranking, but now we're going to start getting serious. You have the Breaker Incendiary Shotgun, and this is absolutely amazing and is an S tier weapon for the bugs. This is a shotgun that fires off a burst of incendiary rounds and makes very quick work of them. You also have the Jar Dominator, which can definitely dominate on the bug front, but really shines versus the bots. This is amazing. It can kill everything pretty quickly, and it has a lot of stagger and damage to go with it. And you also have here the Senator sidearm, which has become a bit of a must-have now, at least on the bot front, as it shoots heavy armor penetrating shots into those enemies and can do things like take the Striders down pretty easily, as well as the Hulks in 3 well-placed shots to the face. And so while this warbond does have some items in it that aren't super amazing or pretty lackluster, you also have some of the best guns in the game on this list. And this warbond provides you with an S tier weapon to take out versus the bugs in the Breaker Incendiary, and an S tier weapon to take out versus the bots in the Jar Dominator, as well as a pretty much must-have sidearm. So while perhaps this is maybe less balanced than something like the Cutting Edge or the Polar Patriots, I think what stands out here really stands out, and so it does get a little bit of extra points here, and that's why I also will be giving it an A. But honestly, all three of these Warbonds are so close that a stray fart could mix up this order and end up changing things. But the next Warbond, I think very clearly sits at a little bit of a higher level than the rest of these, and that is the Democratic Detonation Warbond. Now this one is funny because this was also considered a bit underwhelming at release, with mostly the Eruptor being the standout here, but also the grenade pistol as well. But this Warbond has received a lot of good buffs, such that nearly everything stands out on this one. The Adjudicator is a very strong assault rifle which deals out high medium armor damage along with a good deal of recoil. And this does pretty well as an assault rifle on the bug front, but it can also be switched to its semi-auto firing pattern and used as a pretty effective marksman rifle on the bot front as well. You also have the Eruptor on here, which is this bolt action explosive sniper rifle, and this sends shrapnel through the air, and this was super OP at release and got a couple nerfs, but has since received a number of buffs that has almost restored this back to where it formerly was. This thing hurts enemies well, it can close bug holes and can destroy fabricators, and it makes it very amazing at both utility and killing. But you also have the explosive crossbow here, which is, in my opinion, an S tier for both the bugs and the bots, providing a lot of stagger and splash damage with its explosive bolts, and again having that utility in being able to close bug holes and bot fabricators. This is definitely one of the strongest guns in the game and offers you a lot. You also have the thermite grenades, which are strong as well, throwing sticky bombs on big targets, which can end up taking them down pretty nicely. And you also have the grenade pistol, which is pretty much a must-have weapon. It's honestly, in many respects, arguably the strongest sidearm, with these nice explosive grenades that shoot out from it, and this can be good for closing bug holes and fabricators, as well as taking out some of the bigger enemies and clumps of enemies when you need to. But another aspect of this that shouldn't be forgotten is having this sidearm equipped can open up your throwable slot and other parts of your loadouts in order to have something that can still close bug holes and fabricators, providing you with a lot more variety, opening up the ability to further diversify your loadouts. And these things really stand out and are really important. Now this Warbond also has a booster which allows for faster extractions, and that's a little bit minimal in its usefulness. It does reduce the time to extract, but not by too much, although that can still be good if you're on sample hunts and want to increase your chances. And sometimes it can get pretty dicey on those extractions, so shaving a little bit of time off could help. The armor passives here are also not that unique, but are at least some of the stronger armor sets, with the Fortified and Engineering kit being here, both of which reducing your recoil, and the Fortified helping you with explosions, while the Engineering kit giving you more explosions. So at least you got a few extra options here. Overall though, this one definitely, I think, has the most going for it, especially on the weapon front, with nearly everything being very strong, and even having some things that are kind of must-have in here, that also just open up your loadout variety, allowing you to take things that you might not otherwise be taking with you on a lot of these missions. So yeah, I think this would be my first choice for the Premium Warbonds, and thus the Democratic Detonation Warbond will get an S tier from me. And so here we have the tier list of Premium Warbonds showcasing how they rank. Again, all of these have some usefulness and good things about it, but especially if I were to have to start from scratch and get these, I would go in this particular order. But that's just one poop's humble opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments where you would rank these Warbonds, and thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.